Incest is sexual activity between family members or close relatives. This typically includes sexual activity between people in a consanguineous relationship, and sometimes those related by affinity, such as individuals of the same household, step-relatives, those related by adoption or marriage, or members of the same clan or lineage. The incest taboo is and has been one of the most widespread of all cultural taboos, both in present and in many past societies. Most modern societies have laws regarding incest or social restrictions on closely consanguineous marriages. In societies where it is illegal, consensual adult incest is seen by some as a victimless crime. Some cultures extend the incest taboo to relatives with no consanguinity, such as milk siblings, step-siblings, and adoptive siblings. Third-degree relatives on average share 12.5% genes, and sexual relations between them is viewed differently in various cultures, from being discouraged to being socially acceptable. The children of incestuous relationships were regarded as illegitimate, and are still so regarded in some societies today. In most cases, the parents did not have the option to marry to remove that status, as incestuous marriages were and are normally also prohibited. A common justification for prohibiting incest is avoiding inbreeding, a collection of genetic disorders suffered by the children of parents with a close genetic relationship. Such children are at greater risk for congenital disorders, death, and developmental and physical disability, and that risk is inversely proportional to their parents' coefficient of relationship, a measure of how close the parents are related genetically. But inbreeding is not the sole basis for the incest taboo for two reasons. First, most prohibitions on incest cover affinity relationships, that is, relationships created by marriage, as well as relationships created by adoption. And second, the incest taboo also applies to non-procreative sex, for example, sex between infertile relatives and sex performed with birth control. In some societies, such as those of ancient Egypt and others, brother-sister, father-daughter, mother-son, cousin-cousin, aunt-nephew, uncle-niece, and other combinations of relations were practiced among royalty as a means of perpetuating the royal lineage. Some societies, such as the Balinese and some Inuit tribes, have different views about what constitutes illegal and immoral incest. However, sexual relations with a first-degree relative are almost universally forbidden. Terminology. The English word incest is derived from the Latin incestus, which has a general meaning of impure, unchaste. It was introduced into Middle English, both in the generic Latin sense and in the narrow modern sense. The derived adjective incestuous appears in the 16th century. Before the Latin term came in, incest was known in Old English as siblegia or mgh-med, but in time, both words fell out of use. History. Antiquity. In ancient China, first cousins with the same surnames were not permitted to marry, while those with different surnames were. Several of the Egyptian pharaohs married their siblings and had several children with them. For example, Tutankhamun married his half-sister Ankhesenamun, and was himself the child of an incestuous union between Akhenaten and an unidentified sister wife. It is now generally accepted that sibling marriages were widespread among all classes in Egypt during the Greco-Roman period. Numerous papyri and the Roman census declarations attest to many husbands and wives being brother and sister, of the same father and mother. The most famous of these relationships were in the Ptolemaic royal family. Cleopatra VII was married to her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, while her mother and father, Cleopatra V and Ptolemy XII, had also been brother and sister. The fable of Oedipus, with a theme of inadvertent incest between a mother and son, ends in disaster and shows ancient taboos against incest, as Oedipus is punished for incestuous actions by blinding himself. In the sequel to Oedipus, Antigone, his 4 children are also punished for their parents' incestuousness. Incest appears in the commonly accepted version of the birth of Adonis, when his mother, Myrrha, has sex with her father Cinyras during a festival. disguised as a prostitute. In ancient Greece, Spartan king Leonidas I, hero of the legendary Battle of Thermopylae, was married to his niece Gorgo, daughter of his half-brother Cleomenes I. Greek law allowed marriage between a brother and sister if they had different mothers. For example, some accounts say that Elpinice was for a time married to her half-brother Cimon. Incest is mentioned and condemned in Virgil's Aeneid Book Vi. Hypthalamum invasion nativetitos Kymenios. This one invaded a daughter's room and a forbidden sex act. Roman civil law prohibited marriages within 4 degrees of consanguinity but had no degrees of affinity with regards to marriage. Roman civil laws prohibited any marriage between parents and children, either in the ascending or descending line ad infinitum. Adoption was considered the same as affinity in that an adoptive father could not marry an unemancipated daughter or granddaughter even if the adoption had been dissolved. Incestuous unions were discouraged and considered nephas in ancient Rome. In AD 295 incest was explicitly forbidden by an imperial edict, which divided the concept of incestus into 2 categories of unequal gravity. The incestus iuris gentium, which was applied to both Romans and non-Romans in the empire, and the incestus iuris civilis, which concerned only Roman citizens. Therefore, for example, an Egyptian could marry an aunt, but a Roman could not, despite the act of incest being unacceptable within the Roman Empire. Roman Emperor Caligula is rumored to have had sexual relationships with all 3 of his sisters. Emperor Claudius, after executing his previous wife, married his brother's daughter Agrippina the Younger, and changed the law to allow an otherwise illegal union. The law prohibiting marrying a sister's daughter remained. The taboo against incest in ancient Rome is demonstrated by the fact that politicians would use charges of incest as insults and means of political disenfranchisement. In Norse mythology, there are themes of brother-sister marriage, a prominent example being between Njord and his unnamed sister, parents of Freya and Frey. Loki in turn also accuses Freya and Frey of having a sexual relationship. Biblical references according to Genesis chapter 20 verse 12 of the Hebrew Bible, the patriarch Abraham and his wife Sarah were half-siblings, both being children of Terah, but with different mothers. According to 2 Samuel, Amnon, King David's son, raped his half-sister, Tamar. In Genesis chapter 19 verses 30 to 38, living in an isolated area after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's 2 daughters conspired to inebriate and seduce their father due to the lack of available partners. Because of intoxication, Lot perceived not when his firstborn, and the following night his younger daughter, lay with him. Other references according to the Book of Jubilees, Cain married his sister Awen. From the Middle Ages onward many European monarchs were related due to political marriages, sometimes resulting in distant cousins being married. This was especially true in the Habsburg, Hohenzollern, Savoy and Bourbon royal houses. However, relations between siblings, that may have been tolerated in other cultures, was considered abhorrent. For example, the accusation that Anne Boleyn and her brother George Boleyn had committed incest was one of the reasons that both siblings were executed in May 1536. Incestuous marriages were also seen in the royal houses of ancient Japan and Korea, Inca Peru, ancient Hawaii, and, at times, Central Africa, Mexico, and Thailand. Like the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, the Inca rulers married their sisters. Huayna Capac, for instance, was the son of Topa Inca Yupanqui and the Inca's sister and wife. Half-sibling marriages were found in ancient Japan, such as the marriage of Emperor Bidatsu and his half-sister Empress Suiko. Japanese Prince Kinashi no Karu had sexual relationships with his full sister Princess Karu no Oiratsume, although the action was regarded as foolish. In order to prevent the influence of the other families, a half-sister of Korean Goryeo dynasty monarch Gwangjong became his wife in the 10th century. Her name was Demuk. Brother-sister marriages were common during some Roman periods, as some census records have shown. In the South Indian state of Tamil Nadu, it is a widely practiced custom for men to marry their sisters' daughters. Prevalence and statistics. Incest between an adult and a person under the age of consent is considered a form of child sexual abuse that has been shown to be one of the most extreme forms of childhood abuse. It often results in serious and long-term psychological trauma, especially in the case of parental incest. Its prevalence is difficult to generalize, but research has estimated 10 to 15% of the general population as having at least one such sexual contact, with less than 2% involving intercourse or attempted intercourse. Among women, research has yielded estimates as high as 20%. Father-daughter incest was for many years the most commonly reported and studied form of incest. More recently, studies have suggested that sibling incest, particularly older brothers having sexual relations with younger siblings, is the most common form of incest, with some studies finding sibling incest occurring more frequently than other forms of incest. Some studies suggest that adolescent perpetrators of sibling abuse choose younger victims, abuse victims over a lengthier period, use violence more frequently and severely than adult perpetrators, and that sibling abuse has a higher rate of penetrative acts than father or stepfather incest, with father and older brother incest resulting in greater reported distress than stepfather incest.